Thank you so much for coming. I'm Deborah McDowell. We're probably going to have a swoop of people coming in. I just raced from Campbell Hall, where we were voting in the faculty meeting to approve our certificate, in graduate certificate in Africana Studies. And so, good, wonderful. So I raced, and the fact that I could leave all the other faculty members there is a great sign that everything was in good hands. I had to come here and welcome you, but and I gather from a text, they just voted and it passed. Yeah, and what I'll say here, just kind of off script, is that the fact that we are at this point represents a significant development in the life and history of this institute, which continues to grow. I can't say by leaps and bounds, but considering that when I took the position over 10 years ago, we had 3 faculty members, not even 1 FTE. These 3 faculty members did not constitute a single FTE. And here we are now, obviously not flush with bodies, but a lot more flush than we have ever been. This is my very favorite time of the year when we welcome the new fellows. Hi, Melvin. And for the record, we're going to try to get our room turned around. We were so eager and excited to get this room 2 years ago that we didn't think through the design very carefully. And so we're now trying to get the room flipped so that when people enter, they're entering from the back. But we could not make that, from back to front rather than front to back. So it is awkward, and especially for people who are just entering the room and they see all these bodies and go, where am I going to sit? So it was poor thinking about design, but we are hoping that we will correct it before very long. Each year I give a variation on these very brief remarks that I'm about to give you. And I toy with saying, well, people come from year to year and they say, well, is Deborah gonna ever have anything new to say? And I keep the kind of basic shell for people who have not been and who don't always know what it is we do and why it's important. So when the late Armstead Robinson founded the Carter G. Woodson Institute in 1981, for those of you not familiar with our history, he began his tenure as director with a twofold mandate: to enhance the research and teaching of African American and African studies in the schools and departments of this university, and to establish an African American Studies Research Center. And I want to pause here just so you get the distinction. In this era, there were any number of African American studies programs and departments in development and established, but very few had a research institute attached to the department. And that is what makes us unique. And that is what we want to keep alive for as long as we possibly can. These scholars, see, here comes the faculty, again, who weren't here 10 years ago. Here. Come on in. Everybody who comes to this knows also that I can be very giddy. So, I interrupt myself and give shout outs to people and all right, okay. So the fellows in this institute 10 years ago, they were 3 in number, all right? Now they are 11 and soon to be 12 steady state, all right? That was not the case. It used to be that they sat in a lean-to 2-story house, a little white house, that if a hurricane blew, it wouldn't survive, right where now Hall stands, all right? And the fellows took turns using the computer. So I like to tell people, don't start complaining. You all are not touching each other. When can I get on the computer? You have your own computers. You now have newly renovated digs. Again, not flush, but we ain't what we used to be. Okay, all right. So, this was the first of Virginia's colleges and universities to establish an African American Studies program, which after years of agitation became a department just last year. All right, so each year at Meet the Fellows, we celebrate a new milestone. Last year, Debbie Best had these giant size scissors in a red ribbon. I had just made an offhand comment, well, we should have a ribbon cutting ceremony. Well, she took it literally and draped a red ribbon and had scissors literally about this. So there are photographs out there somewhere with me clipping the red ribbon, all right, because to celebrate our becoming a department last year. Since its founding, the Institute has broadened its scope to include other majors of operation, digital initiatives, largely through its sponsorship and support of research initiatives related to Charlottesville and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And these are research initiatives conducted both by independent scholars and by members of our faculty. We have since expanded to include an arm that we like to call public outreach through our schedule of programs and forums designed to bring the work of the Woodson Institute into the public square, as it were. And I'll pause here to announce that a week from today, Wednesday, October 17th, but in room 125, we will be hosting a forum called the National Prison Strike and the Carceral State, featuring Professor Dennis Childs from University of California, San Diego. This is a part of a public outreach program we call Currents in Conversation, and it is as it sounds. Whatever it is that commands the headlines, occupies conversation for weeks on end, with implications for the study and lives of people and people of African descent, we decide to have a forum. Most recently, we had one on race, SHIT countries, and immigration. I won't say that thing. And so this is not a current in conversation. So we're doing a variation on the theme. We say that there was a national prison strike that went on for about a month in this country that received virtually no coverage. It's scandalous. So we're inverting our typical reason for currents in conversation. So this was a not current in conversation that we are going to make one with scholars doing fascinating work, only Childs from out of town, the rest coming from within our environs, including one local journalist, okay? The third leg of our operations is the publications leg. Many people don't know a lot about that leg, but we have an imprint of the University Press of Virginia. We like our fellows to know that that is an option for them. They can submit work to us. Over the years, this imprint has seen numerous successful publications, and we hope to keep it alive, and with any luck, with publications from within the network of our own fellowship program. This afternoon, we focus on the Woodson Institute's internationally renowned fellowship program. Now, I can say that, although it seems a bit boastful, because I didn't found it, and it is internationally renowned. Since its inception, the program has sponsored both pre- and postdoctoral fellowships from robust applicant pools. In addition to advancing the research goals of the Institute, the presence of these fellows has enriched the number and range of course offerings available within our undergraduate curriculum. Further, the program has been instrumental in faculty recruitment and has been, over the years of its existence, among the most successful and cost-effective means of advancing the critical work of building a diverse faculty at the University of Virginia. We are proud this afternoon alone that at least 3 of our current faculty members, all appointed exclusively in our department, not jointly appointed, migrated from the fellowship program to the faculty. Edwin Kwame Otu, who just came in. Raise up your hand, Kwame. Who has become one of our most popular professors. I walk around the hall and every other hour somebody says, well, I'm looking for Professor Otu, and I say, you and everybody else. Talitha LaFloria, who is not with us this afternoon, and most recently, Tony Curtis Perry, seated there. Tony, raise your hand. Selected through an intense international competition, the Woodson Fellows are themselves a diverse group of young scholars from different disciplines in the humanities and social sciences who work on a wide array of topics in African American and African studies. Our champion, Marlena Dowd, who just defended and oversaw our certificate, all right? Sorry, Marlena. And Professor Robert Fatton, a stalwart member of our faculty affiliate roster. All right. Over the course of our nearly 37-year history, the Institute has sponsored over 200 fellows whose work has appeared in numerous books and articles published by the foremost university presses and academic journals. Woodson alumni hold tenured and professional positions at such institutions as Harvard, Yale, Michigan, MIT, Stanford, Duke, Fordham, Howard, Berkeley, Ohio State, UC San Diego, University of Iowa, Northwestern, University of Texas, Austin, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Tulane, Auburn, Vassar, Williams, Smith, Hamilton, Carleton, Bowdoin, Queens, Brown, and the College of William and Mary. And that's just a selection. Our fellows are in all these places. Many of them have earned national and international distinction in their fields. It seems that each year when we host Meet the Fellows, one or another in our current cohort or among our alumni has just received a major award or prize. In the past, these have included the MacArthur Prize from Dylan Penning Roth, now working at Stanford, the Bancroft Prize in History. This year, it is once more our faculty member, Talitha LaFloria, who was awarded the coveted Carnegie Fellowship last year and will be on leave from us for the next 2 years. The significance of our fellows and the work they produce cannot be measured by prizes alone, however, but rather by the influence and transformative value of their work for scholarship and pedagogy alike. The circle of Woodson Fellows and alums grows wider and wider with each passing year, and the group from whom you will now hear are joining a rich and distinguished company. They, too, are advancing the research for which this fellowship program is internationally known. Please join me in welcoming our new and returning Carter G. Woodson Fellows. Please follow your program. People will speak in the order in which they appear, and our first speaker is Delali Kumavi.
Thank you, Professor McDowell, for the introduction. I am thrilled at the opportunity to be part of this long lineage of eminent scholars at the Carter G. Woodson Institute, and I look forward to my time here. So as Professor McDowell mentioned, my name is Delali Kumavier, and I'm a fifth-year doctoral candidate at Northwestern. I'm in the English department. My project asks one fundamental question. How do we write about Black travel and mobility in the 20th and 21st century? And to do so, I have settled on the interconnected sites of air, airplane, and airport that illuminate and extend the ways in which we think about, describe, and theorize Black travel. I came to this project through Dion Brandt's poetry collection, A Map to the Door of No Return, where she reproduces a Guardian weekly story of a Nigerian immigrant who died during his deportation. And here's the excerpt from Brand's poetry. And I quote, "In January this year, when police raided the home of Black Africans, 140 police stormed the home looking for drugs, but nothing was found," he, a witness, said. Then they carried out painful anal searches, simply because there was some suspicion that there might be drugs there. All you need is a Black face to be considered suspicious. The focal point of Amnesty's allegation in the case of 25-year-old is the case of 25-year-old Marcus Omofoma, a Nigerian asylum seeker who died while being deported from Vienna to Sofia in May last year. He was bound and gagged like a mummy to the seat by the 3 police officers who accompanied him and arrived unconscious in Sofia, where doctors pronounced him dead. No charges were brought, end quote. Much of this story is old, quotidian to anyone who pays attention to Blackness. We know that anti-Blackness administered through the police leads to the death of Black men, women, and children. We know that Black bodies are overdetermined as searchable by the police, by the TSA, and by the various arms of government. What's new about Marcus Omofoma's story is that his death takes place on a commercial airline. Perhaps this is not so new in itself. In 1999, 2 Guinean boys, Yaguin Koita and Fode Tukaran, were found dead in the landing gear of a Sabina airline in Brussels in the attempt to enter Europe. The flight had landed over 30 times before the decomposing bodies were found. In the study of Black mobility in literary and Black diasporic studies, the image of the ship and the sea has remained dominant. My dissertation, Dreams of Flight, Airplanes and Airports in Black Literature, stages an interdisciplinary conversation that seeks to include within discourses of Black travel these sites. It understands airplane, and airport as interlocking sites that connect contemporary forms of Black transnational travel to its attendant history of slavery. Specifically, I examine writers such as Kojo Opoku-Agyeman, Amma Ataidu, Toni Morrison, Nnedi Okorafor, and Nana Nyako Boateng, to understand how representations of these sites etch out the violence of Black transnational mobility and unveil contemporary and historical experiences of Black global travel. Taken together, these sites allows for a reading of Black literary imaginary and historical reality of border crossing that addresses the realities of travel in our contemporary moment. Dreams of Flight insist on the continuity between the hold of the slave ship and that of the airplane, and airport to refuse easy conflation of flight with freedom. It takes a critical stance against notions such as Afropolitanism that mistakes access and accumulation of economic capital for Black freedom and liberation, by showing how the technologies that make these categories of hypermobility possible have complex and extensive roots in the dehumanization of Black personhood. By reading together texts that have often been separated by regional and by regionalist analytical frames, I seek to undertake a study of Black mobility and travel that is attentive to the spaces that Brand's work opens up when she writes, hopefully, cautiously. One might even argue for the sheer magnificence of our survival against history. Yet, ellipsis. Thank you. So kindly allow me to introduce my colleague, Chinwe Oriji.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Chinwe Oriji, and I am a second-year pre-doctoral fellow here at the Woodson, and also my home institution is University of Texas at Austin, African and African Diaspora Studies. So in recent debates, the presence of contemporary Black Africans in the United States has raised concerns of how US racial structures impact their racial identities and modes of economic mobilities. These debates continue to reinforce Black Africans as solely racialized as Black upon arriving to the United States, leaving their home countries outside the bounds of racialization. Therefore, in recent scholarship, Black racialization is predicated on an immigrant community's racial affiliation with historical Black communities in the US. Rhetoric of assimilation and integration take precedence in understanding Black immigrant access to the US that limits the US as a settler colonial apparatus that is internally confined to the nation state. Such rhetoric ignores that the US is also a global racial imperial apparatus that's incorporated within Western empire making. These debates are rooted in a lack of investment in viewing race for Black Africans as globally constructed due to inequitable capitalist endeavors in contemporary Africa by Western geopolitical entities. Therefore, my project, Race in Africa, Africa as Diaspora, the transatlantic racialization of post-independent Nigerians, uses an 8-month ethnography of Nigerians in Houston, Texas, including participant observations, semi-structured interviews, surveys, and autoethnographic accounts to situate the racial formation of Nigerians in Houston as squarely positioned in Nigeria and also the US. My project reveals the transnational iterations of race and Blackness for Nigerians in the US and how it intersects with issues of class, gender, indigeneity, and sexuality. I engage 4 racially imbued sites of analysis: 20th century African immigrant historiography, Black African ethnic formation, Black interracial solidarity, and social memories of the Nigerian Biafra War. So the manuscript argument is twofold. First, it uncovers how Nigerians' modes of solidarity with US Black communities constitute a form of hegemonic racialization I term obligated Blackness. While it can be considered an act of conscious raising, obligated Blackness is hegemonic because it deems Nigerians as solely racialized within place-based US geopolitical boundaries. For instance, many of my interlocutors imagine their race and ethnicity as 2 distinct, mutually exclusive entities, where to be racialized as Black was thought of an erasure of Nigerian identities, which led many to imagine their Nigerian-ness outside of racial structures of power. So many Nigerians do not articulate the ethnicity as racialized because race and Blackness is usually premised on the socio-historical reality of US enslavement. As a result, an obligation to a form of Blackness overshadows their relationship toward Blackness within post-independent Nigeria. Second, it contends that Nigerians' ethnic subject making is based on an indigenous position where race, ethnicity, and indigeneity are mutually constitutive due to racial imperialism and neo-colonial nation-state formation for post-independent Africans. I use the memory of the Nigerian Biafra War as an embodied archive to situate my interlocutors' memories of structural, bodily, and sexual violence during the war as part of a broader discourse of global racial imperialism of Nigeria enacted to the Nigerians' racialized indigeneity. Nigerians' diasporic reality in Houston indicate the global, mutually constitutive nature of race and ethnicity. Their race-based experience affirm, but also extend beyond the Middle Passage epistemology to include colonization, globalization, imperialism, and immigration in relation to post-independent Black Africa. Overall, my work demonstrates how frameworks of global racialization of Black Africans' ethnicities in the US is absent in studies of African immigrant communities due to a belief that Nigerians and Africans at large enter a post-racial or raceless reality until arriving to the US, used to erase racial imperial actions of the West that structurally marginalize Black Africa and Black Africans in the US. Thank you. Next, we have Pablo Lopez Oro, and he is also in African Diaspora Studies at University of Texas at Austin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I'm incredibly honored to be in the company of phenomenal scholars, and I'm putting on a mic. Okay. So the title of my dissertation project is Querying Garifuna, the diasporic politics of Black indigeneity in New York City. I wanted to start my brief conversation about my project with a video clip from the New York Times titled Being Garifuna, which was comes out during the time I'm writing the prospectus, so it really kind of sparks a lot of the questions that I'm having about the project. Give me 1 second.
People just automatically think I'm Black. I mean, they say it, they're like, oh, but you look Black. I'm like, okay, yeah. But it's more to it. It's more to who I am.
On a Sunday afternoon last spring, several hundred people, mostly of Honduran descent, gathered in a school auditorium in the Bronx for the Miss Garifuna beauty pageant.
The girls, they wear the outfits that the women from the Garifuna village used to wear. When they perform, they're picking dances the Garifuna people used to do in Honduras. They're sugar-coated, they're not adding anything modern to it, it's just the culture.
The Garifunas are part African, part Caribbean, and part Central American. They descend from the native Arawaks of the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, and also from a group of West African slaves who landed there in 1797. In recent decades, many have immigrated to New York City.
New York is the largest Garifuna community outside of Central America. There are guesstimates that there are 200,000 Garifunas in all the 5 boroughs.
But when it comes to being counted in the census, the Garifunas say they don't fit into any box. Increasingly, there is a disconnect between how different ethnic and racial groups identify and how the census wants to count them. In the 2010 census, more than 18 million Latinos rejected the standard race categories, instead picking the catch-all known as some other race. Many argue, like 22-year-old Dilma Suazo, that they are so racially mixed that they constitute their own race.
Yeah, okay, good. Garifuna, to me, is who I am. It's my culture, it's my language, it's my food, it's literally my family.
In the lead up to the 2010 census, Dilma and others in her family selected other race and wrote in Garifuna.
Everybody did it. My aunt did it, my mom did it. So hopefully, maybe even longer, maybe in a couple of years, it will be that box that would say Garifuna. We no longer have to check other and have to write Garifuna.
Who's the cook?
Ooh, everybody.
Dilma's family gathered at her grandmother's apartment in East New York, Brooklyn for traditional dinner, dancing, and conversation.
Usually, like if I had to check off a box, I would put as my race or how I would identify myself as Latina. I would never put Garifuna or other, check other, until currently I put other now, but I didn't know if it was valid, if Garifuna was valid to put, like if they would understand where that came from.
You see diversity with Asians and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. You grow up looking at their culture, but then you realize, okay, that's their culture. But what about mine?
If you want to go color-wise, sure, I can say I'm Black. Do you want to go language-wise? Sure, I can say I'm Hispanic.
Technically, it's brown skin.
But, I mean, yeah, seriously, so now you're here, we're like, okay, you got all this other check stuff, and so we go up there, we're like, you know what? We're going to go to other and just put that in for now.
The Census Bureau acknowledges there's a problem with the questions of race and ethnicity. In 2010, they tested different wording in the forms, and last year they held focus groups with a report expected this summer.
So Querying Garifuna, the diasporic politics of Black indigeneity in New York City, centers the lives of Dilma Suazo, Yesenia Martinez, Jose Francisco Avila. It looks at the complications around Blackness, indigeneity, and Latinidad. I particularly look at building on a Black queer diasporic theoretical framework where I closely examine gender and sexuality to see the ways in which it shapes this particular negotiation, this particular performance. I'm always intrigued by Dilma's assertions of I'm Black, but there's something more to me, particularly in the context of the United States. So the dissertation project tries in really complex ways to be hemispheric, even though New York City is the site of the ethnographic research. I look at Central America's Caribbean coast as a site of anti-Blackness, particularly as a site of long centuries of anti-Blackness and the larger framework of racial formations of Latin American mestizaje. And how particularly Garifuna communities who particularly claim a Black indigenous identity formation and subject making is really quite important in their hemispheric consciousness around Blackness, indigeneity, and Latinidad. I also turned to St. Vincent, particularly as a site of homeland and nostalgia. So I turned to performance studies, I turned to Black queer theories around self-making and kinship and ancestral memory to do the political labor of queer in Garifuna, but to closely examine what is this assertion between Blackness, indigeneity, and Latinidad. Thank you for your time.
Indeed. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Seth Palmer. I am a second-year pre-doctoral fellow now here at the Woodson and a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology and the collaborative programs in Women's and Gender Studies and Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto. My dissertation, titled In the Image of a Woman, Spirited Identifications and Embodied Interpolations Along the Betsibuka Valley, illustrates the relationship in northwestern Madagascar between spirit possession and same-sex desiring and/or gender-variant male-bodied persons, known as Sarambav in Malagasy, and a term which literally translates to in the image of a woman. The project is based on 24 months of multi-sited fieldwork in 3 different sites. First, a rural riverine town and surrounding villages in the Betsibuka Valley. Secondly, a small regional port city on the Mozambique Channel. And finally, the nation's capital, Antananarivo. In the Image of a Woman centers around the compelling and perplexing convergence between the quote-unquote modern projects of LGBT rights work and HIV prevention activism and the quote-unquote traditional Malagasy idiom and embodied experience of spirit possession or spirit mediumship. The transnational interventionist projects of human sexual rights and public sexual health, both of which are largely backed by foreign political actors, have expanded through the quintessentially Malagasy art of spirit possession. My project considers a place of pilgrimage in the lives of Sarambavi spirit mediums, specifically charting the ritualized return to spirit shrines in the Betsibuka Valley, but also the comings and goings that emerge out of HIV prevention work and activism, in a sense, their own kinds of pilgrimages. Furthermore, my project meditates upon the shifting temporal allegiances of Sarambavi spirit mediums who at once attempt to return to the past, given their roles as mediums to ancestral spirits, while simultaneously remaining invested in the project of a rights-bearing future. In thinking the queer alongside the possessed, In the Image of a Woman considers how queer subjectivities and temporalities are produced through mediumship, and in turn the project highlights Eurocentric assumptions about Western queer theories of subjectivity and temporality themselves possess. Chapters of my dissertation coalesce around an array of figures, including a sex worker spirit named Mbutamasaki, a family of mermaid spirits, the Sarambavi figure as conceived in French colonial medical literature, and the newly emergent medicalized figure of the Malagasy MSM, which stands for Men Who Have Sex with Men. My project thinks alongside these figures to consider, among other themes, the hermeneutical labor that literal and metaphorical images and self-image making play in the social worldings of Sarambavi, and the Malagasy debates around realness and authenticity, performativity, and embodiment that they engender. Within the relatively novel and burgeoning field of queer African studies, much astute scholarship focuses on tensions between neo-colonial LGBT rights organizations, global HIV/AIDS prevention industries, the trans and homophobic Christian or Muslim post-independence nation state, and local activisms and articulations of non-conforming genders and sexualities. Within this body of literature, my ethnographic work participates in this collective struggle to complicate and nuance representations of queer Africa. More specifically, my dissertation troubles commonly held assumptions regarding the seemingly antagonistic relationship between global LGBT activism and religious experience. As evinced in the lives of my interlocutors, the nuanced interplay between possession, sexual and gendered subjectivity, and LGBT social movements in Madagascar challenges the secular logic that dominates much of queer African studies, but also queer studies more generally. In so doing, In the Image of a Woman brings religion back into queer anthropology without romanticizing the ritualized roles of an ahistorical queer native, as was present in earlier anthropological scholarship. Valorizing the participation of Serembavi in the practice of spirit mediumship is particularly important in this contemporary moment of rapidly increasing hostility towards both indigenous religiosities and same-sex desire by emergent forms of charismatic Christianity and Islam on the island. While completing my dissertation, I've begun to turn my attention to two future projects. The first, based on archival research, considers the trial of a French policeman in colonial Madagascar who was accused of same-sex rape by his male Malagasy domestic laborer. I use this particular historical event, which was later debated in the halls of the French National Assembly, as an invitation to consider how anxiety over racialized sexualities centrally informed the shifting juridico-legal power structures of French imperial rule, and its relationship to the violent colonial project of police enforcement. The second, a major ethnographic project provisionally titled Malagasy Jews, Queering Origins and Racing Religion on the Red Island, is concerned with the recent uptake of Judaic forms of worship and increasingly popular Malagasy claims to Judaic ancestry. The project considers what is at stake in this shared turn towards an Israelite past and what this move signifies about the changing Malagasy religious landscape, its relationship to local racialized ethnicities and global discourses of anti-Blackness, and finally, the nation's interminable political crisis. And now I'm going to introduce Sean Reed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Reed. I'm a PhD candidate at Syracuse University in the Department of Anthropology. I'm an archaeologist, and I work in West Africa. I've worked in the Gambia, Sierra Leone, South Africa, and now my dissertation project is in Ghana. And I'm working in the coasts and forests of Ghana in a region that is very significant for Atlantic history. I'm working in the vicinity of Cape Coast Castle and Elmina Castle. So I'm an archaeologist, and oftentimes people think of archaeologists working at a site. I work on the landscape itself. I work on hundreds of sites. And a lot of my dissertation work is survey. So I'll read a little bit, then I'll go back to talking. Reading landscapes as artifacts of deep history and historical ecology is a productive yet immensely a challenging approach in terms of African archaeology. My proposed dissertation attempts to bridge this gap through an examination of transformation and settlement patterns, socio-political complexity, trade, technological change, and agricultural developments in Ghana's coast and forest region over the past 2,000 years. In doing so, I challenge prevalent narratives about pre-Atlantic West African history and demonstrate the socio-political complexity of inhabitants in the first and early second millennium AD. Utilizing archaeological survey, excavation, and multispectral imagery analysis, my research examines how such societal changes were described in the land and vegetation in features such as sacred groves, earthworks, artifact scatters, and bedrock grinding slicks where stone tools were being mass-produced. My contribution is critical to both African studies and African archaeology, considering the dearth of knowledge regarding pre-Atlantic material culture. It is timely considering the ongoing destruction of archaeological sites due to illicit gold mining, unsanctioned logging activities, and rapid development. Without this research, our ability to interpret the deep and vital history of this anthropic landscape is limited. Furthermore, while much of the archaeological work in this region focuses on the Atlantic period, providing detailed knowledge of the forts, the castles, and even plantations, my research sheds light on the longue durée to better understand and contextualize changes wrought in African societies as they were progressively entangled with the Atlantic economy after the 15th century. So I'm doing three things essentially in my research. I'm developing and synthesizing the archaeology of the region as a whole. I'm marshaling it to push back against a certain historical narrative that argues that the Akan people of the coast and forests, including the Ashanti state, were essentially hunter-gatherers before the Europeans came. And this historical narrative argues that the Akan people developed states because of the gold trade, because of the trade in enslaved people. But from an archaeological lens, it's absolutely not true. We see evidence of settled agricultural, iron smelting communities all over this landscape in the pre-Atlantic era, 1,000 years before Europeans arrived on the coast. So a lot of what I was doing when I was in the field for about a year, was surveying in the forests and in sacred groves. There are many sacred groves. These are patches of tall forest where it is believed that spirits live. And archaeologically, it's interesting because in many of these sacred groves, you find all kinds of pre-Atlantic material cultures, ceramics and stone tools, and some of them were actually Iron Age settlement sites. So this is a landscape that's been radically transformed by the societies that have lived there over the past 2 millennia. And the third thing that I'm doing in my dissertation is it's methodological in nature. I'm trying to develop new approaches to archaeological survey. This is a very difficult area to survey. It's in the forests. It's the bush, essentially. So it's not very easy to see where sites are, but you can actually look at some imagery, some satellite imagery, and read the vegetation. And the forests, some of the forests themselves are anthropic in nature. They tell you where settlement sites are because of the trees that are there, because of the vegetation that has grown up. So I'm developing new approaches to satellite imagery analysis that can be used all over the forest regions of West Africa. So yeah, thank you. I'll turn it over to Halimat some time.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this event. I would also like to thank Professor McDowell, Debbie Best, Shelley Thomas, and the faculty for organizing this program and for giving me the opportunity to develop my research at the Woodson Institute. My name is Halimat Shomoton, and I'm a first-year pre-doctoral fellow. My home institution is Columbia University, and I'm in the African History program. My dissertation is entitled, In the Wider Interests of Nigeria, Lagos and the Making of Federal Nigeria, 1949 to 1976. In 1954, Severin Ikwesi, one of Nigeria's foremost writers, published People of the City, which became one of the first West African novels to chronicle urban life. The plot was set in Lagos, the administrative center and port city of colonial Nigeria, and it follows the adventures of Amusa Shango, a young crime reporter and a band leader during the 1940s. While Shango's desires are to forge ahead and carve for himself a place in the town, his relationship with his friends, landlord, boss, and romantic partners hinders these goals. Due to the experiences of low wages, high cost of living, and lack of adequate housing, Shango and the other characters struggle to establish their places. Although the characters exploit each other to survive the harsh living conditions, they come together during moments of national tragedy. People of the City was published in the midst of Nigeria's transition into independence and agitations over the status of Lagos in the emerging nation. In 1954, the colonial government and Nigerian ministers declared Lagos the federal capital, a controversial resolution that was reversed in 1976 when the independent military government of Nigeria shifted the capital to Abuja in the north. Nigerians were divided in their opinions about the position of Lagos and the various urban renewal schemes that were enacted to develop the town. The ambivalent decisions over the position of the capital affected how residents access resources such as housing and how they imagined and performed belonging. My dissertation examines how the debates and policies regarding the transformation of Lagos into the center of the nation shape meanings of identity and belonging. This research illustrates the spatial and political transitions of Lagos from the perspectives of landowners, tenants, photographers, novelists, and musicians from diverse ethnic, racial, and gender backgrounds. I engage official correspondences, petitions, and newspaper articles from archives in Nigeria and the United Kingdom. I also use novels, photographs, and musical recording to document everyday experiences and alternative imaginations of urban life. Each chapter interrogates how various actors struggled to forge connection to Lagos as they confronted the administrative policies. For instance, in the third chapter, I explore how homeowners and tenants contested the use of private housing in the context of population expansion and town planning projects during the 1940s and 50s. I analyzed Ikwe's people of the city, alongside the opinions of residents in the newspapers and petitions, to show the redefinition of the categories of landlords and tenants, as well as the changes in the meaning of home. By situating the viewpoints of urban dwellers in the remaking of the city, this chapter in my dissertation departs from previous works that often marginalize the voices of residents or portray them as victims of modernist projects. My work shows how the contrasting visions for the development of Lagos impacted the processes of decolonization and post-independent politics in Nigeria. Thank you. And now, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Tracy Stewart.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tracy Mia Stewart. I'm a first-year pre-doctoral fellow, and my home institution is right here at the University of Virginia in the Department of Music's Critical and Comparative Studies program. Thank you to the Woodson Institute and to Dr. Deborah McDowell for making this and so much more possible. Thank you very much. On August 9th, 2018, I returned home after 14 months of research in Jamaica. My project, Music, Memory, and Power in Articulations of 20th and 21st Century Jamaican Maroonage, is an ethnographic study of music's role in the development of Jamaican Maroon identity. I used their music as an analytical lens to examine power as deployed by and against, and as understood by, Jamaican Maroons from historical and modern-day perspectives. My work, which began as a search for musical links between Ghana, Jamaica, and the United States, has evolved into an investigation of music's influence on identity in colonial and post-colonial contexts throughout the African diaspora. I began seeking a connection to an imagined home, but my inquiries have expanded into an exploration of music's role in the construction of identity and its utility as an implement of power. My current project applies conceptualizations of power, authority, agency, authenticity, tradition, knowledge, and value in ways that resonate with Jamaican Maroons in context of sociocultural, economic, and political development. Understanding power as it operated in the worlds of early Jamaican Maroons who attained their freedom, autonomy, and sovereignty after 84 years of war with the British requires that we consider the implications of being free Black people amidst an enslaved Black population in a British plantocracy. They're cast negatively in many historical narratives, but their multi-layered realities don't support such anachronistic or myopic readings. Maroons fought to ensure the survival of their families, and left musical documentation of that history for their descendants. Cultural and ideological conflicts are often revealed in the sharing of this documentation. These conflicts influence how music is performed, who performs it, when it should and shouldn't be performed, and how and by whom it is qualified or disqualified as authentic. I analyzed the struggles between and within Maroon communities and moments of divergence from cultural norms as reflected in knowledge that has and continues to be transmitted across generations, intergenerationally, and intercommunally. In external contexts, non-Maroons' extraction and strategic recontextualization of Maroon cultural icons raises serious questions about the ethics of representation and about Jamaican Maroon agency. Additionally, Jamaican Maroon communities are frequently imagined as outposts of a preserved African past beyond modernity's reach. I use ethnographic moments to examine how such conceptions are reinforced, encouraged, challenged, or refashioned, and the implications of those acts. For instance, Akampong's annual celebration this past January 6th began with traditional Maroon songs. The rain didn't keep people away. Instead, they flocked to the Kinder tree, sheltered beneath a second sky of open umbrellas. The singers, dancers, and drummers seemed to move between the drops. I don't recall seeing Uncle Joe or his drum wet, or Auntie Kant's face shiny from rain. They just kept the songs like they've always done and will hopefully continue to do for many years. The rain didn't matter. Some songs I knew, but even the ones I didn't, felt right in my ears, though admittedly beyond my understanding. They made my feet move without effort and my body sway unselfconsciously. The young ones knew some of the songs, but the elders seemed to know them all, and because they did, and as long as they do, the rain won't matter. It's never mattered. But later, at the parade ground where the speeches began, after the ancestors' hunger had been sated by the offering of unseasoned roasted pork and ground provisions brought to their old town home, something different happened. A new song was sung, one the ancestors didn't likely know and hadn't taught. Akampong town, 'tis of thee, land of the free. One heart, one mind, one nation, Akampong town, strong and free. Its essence was of an earlier time, before Kinda or treaties or freedom or anthems. I felt its meaning, but it was elusive, even deceptive. The Akampong National Anthem, composed in a colonial musical language in representation of a community rooted in an African-centered tradition and characterized by its opposition to colonial oppression, is indicative of the complexity of Maroon histories, traditions, cultural authority, and cultural integrity. It creates questions with multiple truths. Jamaican Maroons reveal music to be a developmentally influential and powerful element in the shaping of African diasporic worlds. Thank you. And I am very pleased to welcome my colleague, Ashley Wade.
Good evening. My name is Ashley Wade, and I'm a second-year pre-doctoral fellow. My home institution is Rutgers University, where I am in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies. So my dissertation, To Be Girl, Digital, and Black, highlights the digital practices of middle and high school age Black girls in the United States, focusing specifically on how they use digital media for self-expression and for theorizing their lives and environments. I've learned so much from these girls, and I want to share a few highlights from the research that reflect my motivation for doing the project, some of the broader implications of the research, and where I envision the project going from here. So I've often shared how my pre-grad school background as a high school teacher influenced my decision to study Black girls' digital practices. But a more personal and everyday moment also shaped my curiosity about Black girls' relationships to digital technologies. About 3 years ago, I was visiting my family for Thanksgiving, and as much of a tradition as the turkey, post-dinner activities involved the adults sitting in the kitchen talking, while the children, 5 girls, ranging in ages from 6 to 12, played outside, far, far away from the elaborate and sometimes scandalous conversations colloquially known as grown folks' business. And after being outside all afternoon, the girls were so excited to show us what they had been doing all day, which was making a dance video. Each girl had a part in the video, and the oldest one edited the video in order to make sure that the choreography flowed with the lyrics from the song in the background. Aside from thinking that the finished product was incredibly cute, the video made me wonder about the mundane nature of digital technologies in the lives of children living in the United States, and how the ubiquitous nature of these technologies shape what it means to be a Black girl child in this moment. Since that early point of curiosity, I've come to learn some of the many ways that Black girls use digital technologies, especially social media, to express themselves, to generate social discourse, to form community with other Black girls and women, and to carve out spaces where they can simply be. The main argument of my dissertation is that Black girls' digital media productions not only reveal their conceptualizations of identity categories like race, gender, and sexuality, but they also demonstrate how Black girls both navigate and create spaces through cultural production. But beyond giving us a better understanding of how Black girls engage digital media, this project has broader implications for documenting Black lives and experiences. As part of my research, I taught an elective class to a small group of Black girls at a high school in Richmond. While I was in the throes of transcribing, a statement from one of my students stood out to me. She and another classmate were talking about their Snapchat adventures, and she exclaimed, "You gotta show your life." The profundity of this statement escaped me during our class session, but as I listened to the audio file, I realized that for people like Black girls who have traditionally been excluded from the various archives of cultural studies, you gotta show your life, lest someone else distorts it, or even worse, erases it. The work I've done with Black girls speaks to the importance of Black folks documenting and sharing our stories on our own terms. Even the challenges and limitations presented by digital and social media platforms as archives lend themselves to larger conversations about the voices and sources that we privilege in practices of recording Black lives. So what's next? One of the biggest changes that I plan to make from the dissertation to the book will involve further exploration of Black girls' geographies with an eye towards Black girls living in the United States South. My goal, in part, in centering Southern Black girls as producers, innovators, and theorists within the digital sphere is to challenge outdated notions of the South as technologically backwards. Ultimately, my future research will continue addressing the ethical implications of doing research with Black girls, particularly in the context of online spaces and in the context of building Black girlhood studies as a field. I'm interested in preventing Black girlhood studies from becoming a purely extractive field and finding creative ways to collaborate with Black girls that include them not just as mere subjects of study, but as collaborators in shaping the field and its evolution. Thank you. Please welcome my colleague, Dion Bailey.
Good afternoon. How is everyone? Thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. My name is Dion Bailey, and I am a second-year postdoctoral fellow here at the Woodson. Gladys and Jamie Scott had never been in trouble with the law. As young African-American women who grew up in rural Mississippi, both women's economic circumstances meant that they had a difficult time attaining social or economic progress. As young mothers, Gladys and Jamie worked hard to earn a living and provide for their children. Gladys, who was 19 years old, was expecting her second child. Her older sister, Jamie, who was 22, had 3 young children. Life often had seemed difficult for both sisters, but they had both maintained adequate employment in their own residences. One event altered their path in life. Whether they were victims of circumstance or affiliation, the armed robbery accusations levied against the Scott sisters changed their lives forever. On the night of December the 24th, 1993, Gladys and Jamie Scott met trouble in the rural town of Forest, Mississippi at a mini-mart convenience store. This trip to the store, a stop that they had made many times before, would gravely affect not only their lives, but the lives of their children for many years to come. Court records and sworn testimony allege that the Scott sisters not only devised a plan to rob two African-American men, but that both sisters, along with 3 teenage accomplices, robbed the 2 victims at gunpoint. And on December the 24th, 1993, police arrested Gladys and Jamie and charged them with 2 counts of armed robbery, which in the state of Mississippi carried a life sentence for each conviction. The amount of money the sisters were accused of stealing was $11. Even though no one was injured in the alleged robbery, what happened next served as a marker of the unjust Mississippi judicial system. During the trial, both male victims testified that they never witnessed Gladys or Jamie with a gun. The judicial system the Scott sisters encountered demonstrated injustice at the highest level. Even though the 3 young teenagers who testified against the Scott sisters admitted that they had committed the robbery and recanted the false testimony that they gave during the Scott sisters' trial, Gladys and Jamie received no leniency from the courts. The young men then also testified that they were forced by the authorities to implicate the sisters as the masterminds behind the robbery. And for their testimony, the prosecutors offered the 3 young teenagers plea deals where they would plead guilty on the charge of strong armed robbery, and they received a reduced sentence of 8 years. The gun allegedly used in the robbery was never found. While the Scott sisters maintained their innocence, a jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of armed robbery for both sisters. And according to their sentences, Gladys and Jamie would spend the rest of their lives behind bars pending parole after each served a minimum of 20 years. So at its core, my book manuscript, tentatively titled Daughters of Jim Crow's Injustice, African American Women, Mass Incarceration and the Business of Black Women's Bodies in the American South, 1890 to 1980, seeks to restore to the historical record the experiences of African American women who have been erased in a history of incarceration focused until recently on African American men. Adopting a bottom-up perspective, my work also nuances scholarly perspectives on the carceral state, the Jim Crow era, convict leasing, and the history of crime and punishment by recovering the voices of Black women who were at the center of the Southern penal system. The book examines the complex and often overlooked history of African American women imprisoned in Mississippi from 1890 through the 1980s. In this period, African American women faced multiple forms of political, social, economic, and legal exploitation at the hands of a Southern society that profited from both their punishment and labor while exploiting their sexuality. By highlighting these women as major actors in the carceral state, my work illustrates how the intersections of race, class, and gender significantly influenced how penology functioned in the South. Southern states, including Mississippi, shaped their public policies and laws around the exploitation of Black women's penal, labor, and their sexuality. For example, beginning in the 1880s, the South developed a unique system of domestic parole enabling states to control and monitor Black women's labor. The Mississippi justice system effectively adopted this system and used its racist ideologies to reinforce existing stereotypes of African American women as lewd, unwomanly, sexually deviant, and innately criminal. The manuscript additionally investigates labor and sexual exploitation within the prison system in order to challenge state-imposed notions of sexual deviance of African American women, both outside and within the prison walls. It contextualizes federal and state judicial systems that criminalize women who were raped, unwed mothers, and those in same-sex relationships. Finally, the manuscript will show that policymakers at Parchman Penitentiary, constructed to function as a penal farm that used the labor of incarcerated men and women to turn a profit for the state, never had any qualms about incarcerating African American women and putting them to work. Reminiscent of the old Southern plantations in the South, the labor of Black women was vital to the success of the penal farm and to the state. So was as the case for the Scott sisters, Mississippi implemented a grave miscarriage of justice. The sisters would experience this injustice for 16 years until their mother and several social activists took up their call for their release. The question remains, what happened to other nameless African American women in prison in Mississippi? Who would speak for them? Who would take up their fight to make sure that their voices were heard? The story is more complicated than simply viewing the tragedy of the Scott sisters as an individual tragedy in which they alone experienced. There are more Scott sisters, not just in Mississippi, but in other prisons around our country and our world. It is important to understand that the Scott sisters represent a demographic of women in the Mississippi penal system that are rendered voiceless due to their criminalization. Their story also represents that the injustice that African American women experienced at the hands of a judicial system that had and still has today a history of demonizing Black women. If it weren't for the kidney transplant that one of the sisters needed that caused the uproar around their release, no one probably would even care, right? And so it took their mother, who was this, right, for intents purposes, a poor woman in the South, who took this charge up on her own for the release of her daughters, who charged against the governor of Mississippi and other politicians to have her daughters released. And now that they are released, both daughters were strapped with fines of over $1,000 a month to pay in restitution. And so they were continuously criminalized even after their release. And so the story continues. Now I would like to introduce you all to my wonderful colleague, Nzinga Kendall. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Nzinga Kendall, and I am a first-year postdoctoral fellow here at the Woodson Institute. I just got my PhD from Indiana University in Bloomington. I'd like to thank you all for being here, and also thanks to the Institute and Dr. McDowell for allowing me this really exciting opportunity to work with all these folks, all you folks, and to continue working on Black women filmmakers. Specifically, my project revolves around Black women who use experimentation in their film work and their video work. And in a world that constrains Black women's expression and limits our ability to live, one of my central research questions is, how does experimental filmmaking allow for moments and spaces of liberation? My research project, Imperfect Independence, Black Women, and experimental filmmaking examines films made by Black women across the diaspora to understand how experimental film practices offer a fleeting yet profound source of freedom in spite of societal oppressions based on race, gender, and sexuality. I theorize these moments of freedom as imperfect independence. One key filmmaker in my study is Sara Gomez. Gomez, who was born in 1942 and passed away in 1974 at 31 years of age of an asthma attack, spent 6 years studying music at Cuba's Municipal Conservatory of Havana before embarking on her film career as an assistant at the Instituto Cubano del Arte y Industria Cinematográficos, ICAIC, or the Cuban Film Institute. And Gomez was one of a handful of Afro-Cubans to work with ICAIC in its initial years, and the first Afro-Cuban to direct films for ICAIC. Her first feature, De Cierta Manera, was one of the first ICAIC-sponsored films directed by an Afro-Cuban woman. I actually saw De Cierta Manera as an undergrad, and that film has just stuck with me. And the ways that Sara Gomez injected into this majority white male organization with her unique kind of filmic and sonic presence is something that's compelled me and still sticks with me today. So what I'd like to share with you is an example of my own experimentation in video form of Gomez's De Cierta Manera. And what this is an example of videographic criticism, which is an innovative and emerging mode of film studies or film criticism, and it uses the audiovisual form instead of written text to engage in film criticism. So in this video, I explore imperfect independence through the film's main characters, Yolanda and Mario, and interspersing the words of Tomas Gonzalez, who was Gomez's co-collaborator on the film. This video hints at the ways that imperfection and erotic feeling, borrowing from Audre Lorde, combined together offer the possibility of redemptive liberation. So, here we go. That's Sara Gomez in the center there. All right, so with that, last but not least, I'd like to welcome you to Claire and Tone Payton. Thank you.
So thank you all for coming, and thank you to our leader, Dr. McDowell. I want to add my gratitude to those who came before, that I get to be part of such a cool inspiring group of exciting colleagues. So I actually want to extend a thank you to each of you guys as well. So as Nzinga said, my name is Claire Antone Payton, and I am a first-year postdoctoral fellow here at the Woodson. I just finished my PhD at Duke University in history this past fall. So what I'll be doing while I'm here is revising my dissertation into a manuscript that I am tentatively calling And We Will Be Devoured: Construction, Destruction, and Dictatorship in Haiti. So my work charts a new political, material, and environmental history of urbanization in the modern Caribbean. Using these different modes of analysis, I'm showing how urban development in Port-au-Prince unfolded across a series of conflicts over modernity, class, and belonging in the city. I argue that these conflicts were central to the consolidation and perpetuation of authoritarian rule under the Duvalier regime, a dynastic dictatorship that ruled Haiti between 1957 and 1986. My project begins from the premise that cities have always been central to the structure of Haiti's social hierarchies, despite the fact that it is widely seen as one of Latin America and the Caribbean's most rural societies. Through an analysis of 19th century laws and legal codes, I show that after Haitians claimed their freedom and independence from the French in 1804, a new class of political elites tried to maintain colonial racial hierarchies by legislating a geography of uneven rights across urban and rural spaces. Despite being the first nation ruled by and for people of color, social divisions were perpetuated by a system in which rurality replaced blackness as the limiting factor of citizenship and inclusion. In this framework, cities served as small privileged command centers from which elites could continue to supervise capitalist extraction from the surrounding countrysides. This spatial social organization that defined much of Haiti in much of the 19th century begins to pretty much break down by the 1950s when the cumulative effects of environmental degradation, demographic growth, and myopic government policies push increasing numbers of farmers away from their farms and towards urban areas, particularly Port-au-Prince, looking for opportunities. So these deeply rooted neo-colonial hierarchies that were previously framed around a stark rural-urban divide begin to find new expressions within the changing urban environment. My work uses archival and printed materials from Haiti, France, Canada, and the United States to bring together political and material history in a new way, revealing how the creation, destruction, and management of urban spaces infuse the daily politics of authoritarianism with the dynamics of rapid demographic and geographic change. Port-au-Prince's growth and the anxieties it created provided the regime with a platform for rewarding allies, punishing enemies, extracting profits, and displaying its ideological visions. For example, demolishing or setting fire to low-income neighborhoods became a tool for terrorizing political opponents. Selective enforcement of environmental protection laws placated local elites who wanted to build exclusive neighborhoods on protected hillsides outside the city center. As urbanization fueled the demand for construction materials, the political economy of cement became a key part of the regime's strategies of kleptocratic extraction. The construction of the city also factored into international relations. The construction of Port-au-Prince's airport was at the center of a hemispheric Cold War drama linking together Haiti, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and the United States. So urban transformation, I argue, became one of the main modalities of political negotiation in Haiti at this time on both the local and the international levels. This project makes interventions in several disciplines. It moves the field of Haitian studies beyond crass caricatures of the Duvalier dictatorship by providing the first archivally based account of its inner workings in English. As one of the first urban histories of Port-au-Prince, it provides a case study that puts the city into conversation with urban studies in the global south and contributes to the project of unexceptionalizing Haiti. And it expands African diasporic studies by reinforcing how the concept of urban crisis is connected to post-colonial legacies of racism and slavery. This work is also about disaster. I arrived at this project after spending 6 months in Haiti conducting oral history interviews with earthquake survivors after the survivors of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. Listening to the stories of people rendered homeless by disaster made it clear to me how transformations to the built environment, whether sudden or gradual, had enormous consequences for the kinds of lives that people could live within those environments. So this project is, in a sense, a historical accounting of how the city that collapsed came to be. I argue that the physical vulnerabilities that made the Haiti earthquake one of the deadliest disasters in the history of the Americas, and one could argue the history of the world, between 100 and 300,000 people died in like 45 seconds. I argue that the physical vulnerabilities that made the Haiti earthquake one of the deadliest disasters in the history of the Americas and possibly the world were the manifestations of political, social, and economic vulnerabilities that characterized life under the Duvalier regime. We can see how the earthquake's destructive power was facilitated by larger systems, both local and global, that perpetuate massive inequality in Haiti and around the world. At the same time, it's not enough to only talk about the deeper historical legacies of structural violence that laid the foundations for the earthquake. Their consequences are not abstract or immaterial. People experience these forces in their lives primarily through tangible issues such as unequal access to safe housing. In the case of the Haiti earthquake, the history of Port-au-Prince's construction offers a method of bridging both the social and material aspects of disaster and thinking through how these dynamics might be shaped for the better in the future. Thank you. And thank you all for staying all the way through.
Later than we typically do because of class. So I would ask